All right, people. The next WWE movie. Does this even count at this point? I mean, they replaced the verses with the X this time, so I don't know. I assume you watch WWE, so I'm just guessing that have there been any matches with like an X in it in order to signify a team up instead of a versus, or like how does that work exactly?
I don't watch now. I do see The Rock doing his thing lately, but when we go further into the movie, it seems like they are slipping further and further into this being like a WrestleMania match or like
Yeah.
a rematch from a match that previously happened already.
It's so funny because I always talked about how like there's never been a good movie with the word versus in the title until Godzilla vs. Kong, but I think I may have been giving that a little bit too much credit because now we unfortunately settled with this. People, in case you haven't tell, it's Infinity Ape and Gender Fluid Lizard are back. It's Godzilla and Kong, the new empire. I'm here with John Maffeo. Let's not waste any time. Let's get this going. All right, what's up, John? Happy to have you back.
Thank you for having me back.
Of course,
You were
man.
just saying earlier that it's almost been like a year since I've been on this podcast, and I feel like the time just slips away because I can't believe it's been that long.
Yeah, it really is. It's kind of nuts because, like I said, the last time I had you on, we were talking about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and we were saying goodbye to a very, very beloved franchise. I think that's been with us for the better part of a decade. Now we're talking about Godzilla and Kong: The New Empire, a movie that, well, let's just say it's fitting that we've reached this point of movies in 2024. We finally got the phenomenon that was Dune 2. We only had to wait an extra 3-4 months for it. And as expected, it pretty much swept all the other competition out of the way. There were some other pretty decent movies that came out in March. We got Love Lies Bleeding. We got the Roadhouse remake for all the 5 people that saw Kung Fu Panda 4. There was the Sydney Sweeney movie Immaculate. Did you watch that yet, by the way?
I saw it with my friends last week, yeah, and I have thoughts on it. I liked it.
I mean, yeah, my whole thing is, it's like, my whole thing with that movie is that, like, the first, like, hour is just kind of meh. It's just kind of white Get Out, essentially. But the last 30 minutes are some of the all-time greatest horror movie ending of all time.
It really ramps up. It really, I wouldn't take family to watch this movie.
No. Especially if they're religious.
No.
Definitely not.
The marketing for the movie has been great, though. I've seen a lot of fun stuff with Sydney Sweeney, like interacting with real pastors and like doing
listen,
crazy
there is
shit.
Nobody that knows how to market her own stuff better than Sydney Sweeney. She knows exactly what she is doing there.
She's a smart businesswoman. I respect that.
Yes, she is. She even said she got a business degree so that she could actually learn how to do this shit on her own. And let me tell you something, it is paying off. Mm-hmm. But so, John, we're here. Godzilla and Kong, the New Empire, the 5th installment in the Monarchverse, Monsterverse, whatever you want to call it, like the Americanized Godzilla and Kong giant monster movies that have pretty much been going on since 2014's Godzilla. Pretty much brought that back to the forefront. And let's just say that we've been kind of inundated with Godzilla content since then. So obviously, if we're running back the timeline, right? So Legendary announces that they have acquired the Godzilla rights from Toho to essentially do their own Americanized version of Godzilla. They release it in May of 2014. Gareth Edwards directs. What were your thoughts on that movie when that came out?
Back in 2014, I can't believe it's been 10 years since that movie, by the way.
Yeah.
I was very excited for that movie. I mean, I remember the marketing being very exciting, the way they really built up the dread and the scale of Godzilla being back in American cinema. And I really liked Gareth Edwards from when he made that movie Monsters, I think it was called. So I got really hyped just to be able to see like a movie that was taking itself super seriously, it felt like.
Yes.
When I saw it in theaters, I liked it, but I remember walking out being like, that wasn't what I expected, and they didn't show enough Godzilla. But I guess I'll round that back out to what we're talking about for this movie. I appreciate a little bit more looking back at it retrospectively. Like, okay, I get what Gareth Edwards was doing there. I still do think they hold back a little too much from like the actual fighting, but the scale of everything. The only problems I really have with it too, I guess, is the whole Bryan Cranston thing, which spoiler alert,
everybody still kind of goes over it. It's so funny to bring that up because in a way that's kind of one of the things that for me has actually strangely aged the best along with that movie in general. Like it's kind of so funny seeing how like right? You remember what the criticisms were of that movie whenever it came out. Oh, Godzilla's only in the movie for 11 minutes. I'm like, yeah, but it's how well they utilize him. And it's so funny looking back at that movie compared to this movie. That movie basically like may as well be an Oscar movie compared to these movies now. Because
it's so strange.
It is so strange how it's evolved. Because again, like, I mean, just Gareth Edwards' filmography in general and kind of where that's going, with how he followed it up with Rogue One and The Creator. But Gareth Edwards is somebody who, again, pays attention to that sort of stuff, pays attention to the size, the scale of these things. When Godzilla moved, it felt like the earth was literally shaking. Like when he goes through that San Francisco bridge, it is freaking terrifying. And now we've gotten to this point where these monsters, these may as well be Fast and Furious movies now. We got the monsters just running around with absolutely like no scale. Godzilla literally takes like a swan dive off the coast of Gibraltar, which I have so many questions about that. Just that one sequence in general. I was like, Gibraltar and Egypt are nowhere near each other, like geographically wise. Like, who was the freaking geography consultant there?
They did not have a consultant.
No, they did not. But I digress. It's safe to say that these movies have shifted genre significantly. They've gotten a lot sillier. Like I said, they really, I think that in a way, COVID was both the best and worst thing that happened because, like, in terms of how they marketed it, like when they put Godzilla vs. Kong out originally in March of 2021, which also it's been 3 years since that movie, which is kind of insane, and that being like kind of like the first major movie event that we had to kind of get us back to theaters after the hell of COVID, and like. They really marketed that more so as like, this is a movie event, not necessarily like a quality movie. Like it's in the title. You know exactly what you're getting here. But even compared to this one, I was kind of surprised how withheld that one was. Where like, obviously what the thing that everybody criticizes about these American movies is the human subplot and how they're basically like exposition devices. But even that one, I thought I kind of enjoyed the human stuff that was going on more because there was like, it was like a journey. You were kind of going along with them. They weren't just expositional mouthpieces. There was like this connection that they formed with Kong. I also thought that like the bit that they completely stole from Planet of the Apes of where Kong can now communicate through sign language with this the one surviving member of the tribe that lived on Skull Island that was wiped out by the storm. I thought that was a pretty nice touch. The monster fights in that, I thought that what was so cool about the monster fights in that one was I still thought that they did a really good mix between like the scale and the silliness. Like the monsters are moving faster and more fluidly, but I still felt like you got that sense of scale in terms of like when Kong came up out of the ground, like he felt huge. When Godzilla was like moving around, like you really got the sense of size and terror. And I gotta say that if I have one criticism to start off this review, there's none of that here. There's none of that here. These monsters may as well have been turned into cuddly plush toys that you just smash together. Like all of the scale, all of the threat is absolutely gone. I am never once threatened. And Godzilla's still coming in and wrecking shit. He's wrecking landmarks. He's kicking ass and taking names. But like when you have the opening fight between him and what is it, the giant spider monster that demolishes in Rome before taking a nap at the Coliseum, I'm like, okay, these may as well be action figures now. Like I am not getting any sense of scale or terror here at all.
No, I think there's some sense of scale, like the minimal amount at the very end when they fight the Scar King. There's a couple shots of like similar things where you're looking up at the creatures fighting, but there wasn't enough of that clearly in this movie. They clearly didn't have any focus on that. They clearly like pushed that to the side to just like you said, just have some action figures and just do wrestling moves and do silly shit for an hour and 50 minutes.
It's funny because I feel like the biggest difference between Godzilla vs. Kong and this one, in addition to, the scale, is so in that one, you actually, they were like, okay, like we have to have, we have to do our homework in terms of like figure out, because at that point, you establish Godzilla in his own movies, you establish Kong in his own movies. There have been hints at Kong at the end of King of the Monsters, which I also have my thoughts on that one. I'll come back to that one as well. But they needed to do like the work in terms of like, okay, how are we going to do the buildup in terms of like setting up Kong and Godzilla on this collision course for each other, And I actually thought that for the most part, they did a pretty decent job, having Rebecca Hall as the exposition device character that is basically like, oh, Kong and Godzilla have this ancient bitter rivalry, but Kong's been protected because he's on Skull Island, which is kind of like his domain. They've always kind of like respected each other's domains, but if we take Kong off Skull Island, then he's at risk, and then, that kind of sets them up for this big fight. Then you have the other subplot that's building up to Mechagodzilla and everything, and it's not the best. I look at rewatching that movie because I rewatched all the movies leading up to that. I definitely think that I think that Millie Bobby Brown's subplot was probably the weakest part, which unfortunately also brought in Brian Tyree Henry, which, oh man, like. But Brian Tyree Henry, another actor that TV just knows how to utilize that movies unfortunately just do not. I don't think they just keep turning him into goofy comic relief, and
they did him so dirty in this last movie.
So dirty. And But at the very least, like I thought it worked in terms of like setting up the two different camps, in terms of like setting up Godzilla and Kong on their collision course, and then eventually having them team up to fight Mecha Godzilla. It worked, I thought. This time, you literally have Kong is on his own for most of this movie. Like Adam Wingard, the director, talked about the fact that he was basically had entire sequences of this movie where he purposely wanted the monsters on his own, because he is talking about the fact that if he does a third one, he wants to do it with no humans, which honestly, I'm kind of okay with at this point after how the humans are utilized in this one. And honestly, with the treatment of humans in these movies as they have gone along and gotten progressively dumber and dumber and sillier and sillier. And because the humans here, besides the fact that they are on their own for a majority of the movie, it's, I mean, you describe it for me, please. I'm still having a hard time wrapping my brain around exactly what the human purpose here is.
So it is basically just exposition dumps. I do appreciate that it's literally just the same contained group. It's Rebecca Hall, it's Brian Tyree Henry, it's the girl, it's a little girl, and the guy who's the cop from the Batman.
Yes.
Essentially, and the dentist, what's his name?
Dan Stevens. Yeah.
Who I think is the best character, best human character in this movie. He actually understands the assignment, I think, in terms of, and they also give him like, all right, we understand exactly who this kind of character is. He's just a silly dude who's having fun helping the monsters out. But like, yeah, the whole movie, they're just kind of like wandering about, and they only show up to basically repeat what's happening with these CGI characters. Like it happened multiple times, I noticed, where like this is where Godzilla or King Kong wakes up, and then Brian Tyree Henry goes, "Oh, he's waking up." Like, yeah, we just saw that. Clearly, we just saw that happen.
Yeah.
We don't need that. Is that a studio note you guys gave?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just basically the whole movie is just them. Okay, we're going to the Hollow Earth. Okay, we're in the Hollow Earth. All right, get this girl to Kong.
Yeah, and complete with 80s needle drops as well for.
Yes.
Why?
Yeah.
Like for no reason. And
with the last movie too, remember? I remember there's a lot of random needle drops in the last one too.
Yeah, but I feel like in this one they were like more random and out of place. I don't know why, especially maybe because it's like more popular songs, and it's like the one that plays when Dan Stevens flies in with the machine with all of the with all the birds, and then when they first go into Hollow Earth, I'm like, what the? I'm like, I get it, it's supposed to get us pumped, and they literally have a Guardians of the Galaxy-esque slow-mo walk down a hallway. I'm like, what are they doing here? Like, what are they doing?
The tones were clashing quite much in this movie,
quite
similar
much
to like Godzilla and Kong together in this.
Yeah. Like I almost felt like I was telling this to my boss at work. I almost felt like I was watching a video game at points where I'm like literally when you have the three of them in the cave as they're reading off the cave drawings while you're cutting back and forth to Tsuko, the baby ape, leading Kong to Scar King, and Rebecca Hall is just narrating essentially everything that we kind of already know is going to happen in the movie. It's like, I literally was like, okay, like when's the screen gonna flash up that I can hit the button in order to go on to the next level? You know, I was just waiting for that to come up, you know. But I also don't think I've ever been faced with more of a greater conundrum, let's say, because in a strange way, every time it's just the monsters interacting, and I don't know if this is just the fact that Kong like actually has like another figure that's not a human to like interact with and like empathize with like the baby Kong, the Tsuko character. Mm-hmm. And the fact that like he doesn't like have to depend on the humans as much this time as he did in the last one, but all that stuff I actually thought was kind of in a strange way compelling. Like in a weird way, I did see what Adam Wingard was talking about, where he's like, "Yeah, I could have just watched a whole movie that was just about Kong and Tsuko, and then randomly cutting a little bit back to Godzilla." You know, you almost didn't need the humans, and essentially, if you think about it, right, the human subplot was literally just so you could have the little girl, what was her title, the Iwi girl, essentially like become the monster whisperer. Essentially, once they bring back Mothra, that's pretty much the extent of that subplot. And I'm like, did we really need this? You know?
Yeah,
like,
and I guess you also need Dan Stevens to give him the power glove.
Yeah, which
that's also it.
Do we want to talk about how much the trailer spoiled? Because I do realize that I think that a big part of the reason why I didn't enjoy this as much as I did the last one is, man, these trailers told us everything. Like, everything to the point where it's like you couldn't even keep Shimo as a surprise, which by the way, Shimo, really, that's the best name you could have come up with for that monster? Really?
The whole movie I was thinking, like, is that a character from the Toho movies?
Literally.
Or just new?
Literally.
I had no
wasn't
idea.
Sure. I really wasn't sure. And then put it this way, I used to play movie trivia back in the day in the online leagues with a guy who had that last name. So I thought I was getting punked for a second. I was like, wait a minute, what?
Where are you? Show yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, so there's that. So the fact that, right, they pretty much showed the entire movie in the trailer, right? Because right, you get Rio, you get Kong facing Scar King, The only thing you don't get is the direct reveal of Shimo, but with the ice and everything, it's like, and you can see like the wide of Godzilla fighting him in the background. So I mean, so we've talked around it a lot. I guess we should probably say what the plot of this movie now, if anything, because hard as enough as it is to say, there is a plot. Barely.
There is?
But there is, sort of. So essentially we start off, Kong's like alone in Hollow Earth. He's running around. It kind of shows him like doing his daily routine. And I actually thought that was kind of interesting. I was actually kind of like compelling. I'm like, okay, I'm in on this. And then and it basically establishes like, oh, Kong's lonely. As Rebecca Hall exposition device tells us in the beginning, it's like, okay, as long as Kong stays in Hollow Earth and Godzilla's on the surface protecting us from the monsters. And it's really funny how like Godzilla has basically become like Task Force Monster for Monarch, where the opening scene is him fighting this giant spider thing in Rome, and before like just taking a nap in the Coliseum. I'm like, okay, so the Coliseum is just where he chills now, so we're just gonna forget about like Atlantis, where he was chilling in King of the Monsters. Okay, good to see the continuity is still really good in these movies. But so then next thing you know is you have this crazy signal that goes off from in the center of the earth, which prompts both Kong and Monarch to investigate. And they basically discover that there is an entire other group of apes led by this evil giant ape orangutan called Scar King, who's got a whip made of bones. And Scar King is trying to use this other titan called Shimo, who breathes ice, in order to basically lead a conquest of the surface world. And they were apparently imprisoned there by Godzilla. And throughout this whole time, Godzilla has been like killing other titans and like absorbing a ton of nuclear radiation so he can like essentially amp himself up and, as they say, evolve to the next level. I'm like, okay, so Godzilla's literally a Pokemon now. He's literally a legendary Pokemon at this point. He's just like absorbing enough energy in order to evolve. And it's inevitably building up towards the other like giant smackdown, while also revealing that, oh, there's another sect of Iwi tribe that are still alive. So what's her name? Rebecca Hall's adopted daughter from the last one, who's the Kong Whisperer, is now going to evolve herself into the Titan Whisperer, as she is needed to bring back Mothra, so Mothra can get Kong and Godzilla to work together, and they can take down Scar King and Shimo. And that's pretty much the plot of the movie. And I just realized that was a lot easier to break down than I thought. I thought it was going to be slightly more overcomplicated, which makes me realize that, oh man, they really were just kind of like just filling time. It's so funny because every time I talk about this with my brothers, every time we're talking about these movies, it's like, yeah, we kind of just we don't really just watch the movie. We kind of just fast forward through it to the monster fights, because those are really like, because really the rest of the movie is kind of filler. And I didn't really buy that up until this one. But with this one, I'm like, yeah, it's kind of the case. This kind of is just like 2 hours of filler until we get to the monster fights, because unlike the last one where you had like a pretty cool fight in the middle, and then you had obviously not one but two fights at the end, first with Godzilla versus Kong, and then at the end when it's Godzilla and Kong teaming up to fight Mechagodzilla, this time you're kind of just like loafing around. I mean, it's cool. It's fun chilling with Kong in Hollow Earth, and it's cool like watching him fight all the other monsters. It kind of reminds us of our time on Skull Island. But yeah, it's 2 hours of filler until we get to like the actual monster fight. And the fight's cool, but if anything, I think it's almost too quick. And because we're lacking the scale, it really, really does feel like a video game, like, especially since like we don't really see like any of the humans getting killed. We see just them like throwing around buildings and doing WWE power moves. Like Godzilla smacking Shimo through buildings. Kong's got his mech gauntlet, which he's like blasted through buildings with and shit. And also the fact that like Kong needed the mech glove in the first place to like beat Scar King when he's easily got him in terms of like size and just sheer bulk. And also he's got an axe. Like this should have been over and done with like the first time that Kong met Scar King. And I thought it was really funny how Scar King almost like had to size Kong up and then like reveal and then like use Shimo to beat him, because he knew that he wouldn't stand a chance. So I'm like, it almost kind of robs it of whatever tension there was in this movie.
Sure, yeah, I don't know. I feel like, they were just pretty much making excuses to make the movie longer than it had to be. I had no investment in the human characters in this movie.
None.
I love Rebecca Hall. I love Dan Steve. I love all the actors in this movie, but the actual characters themselves have nothing interesting to do. Like you mentioned before, it's all exposition. There's a shot early in the movie where Rebecca Hall and her adoptive daughter are having like a heart-to-heart moment. I don't know if you're about to hear what I'm doing. And like it's like it's actually like a decent scene, and they cut to a wide, and it's like a very clear like Volkswagen car commercial.
Oh my god!
And I was like, any emotion I had in that moment evaporated immediately.
It was so distracting.
It made me laugh.
It was so distracting. I'm like, they can't even let the emotional scene stand for what it is. And like, I will say that like part of like the emotion that I got from the last one was the fact that, I thought the scenes between, the kid and Kong were actually like pretty touching, especially since the reveal of Kong being able to communicate with her was actually like really surprising. And I was like, whoa, I was not expecting that. That was actually kind of surprising. And this one, because they have so little interaction and we just have her like doing more sign language to Rebecca Hall. And then, of course, oh God, do we even need to go into the scene at the beginning where she has visions and she's like becoming omniscient and she's telekinesing with the monsters, and the teachers are like, "Oh, she's special," and I'm like, "Oh God, we're doing this again, really?" And
it's yeah,
yeah,
it's something.
yeah, it is something. I will say though, I did like Dan Stevens. I had a lot of fun with him. He was the one that definitely understood the assignment. I thought like kind of his back and forth of Brian Tyree Henry, where Brian Tyree Henry is just like, again, they got him doing the Marvel quips and the jokes, and none of them are funny at all. At all, because he goes from like trying to be like crazy and over the top 1 minute to just being like, "Oh, what I want witnessing is purely ridiculous" the next minute, and I'm like, okay,
He's
none of this.
He's the closest thing that we have in this movie to like an audience view where like he's seeing things for the first time and he's freaking out the entire time. Like he's the biggest thing we have possibly to like being like, oh yeah, like we can connect with this character, but he's so like they make him so obnoxious in this that it's hard to really connect with him.
Yep.
Which is silly.
Exactly. Not to mention the fact that it's like, oh, they're trying to have some sort of a subplot where it's like, oh, you know, I'm you know, you guys never let me in through the keys to the kingdom until you need me and such. You know, it's like, oh, I know more than you guys. Once again, like I will always give a shout out to podcasters whenever they are playing an important part in a movie, but not like this, especially when they're like trying to do a thing with like, oh, gatekeepers and like we're like the true, you know, we're a true, you know, men of the people and all that. And then it's just like, nah, you're just here to freaking spout more dumb exposition and just react and make goofy faces and such. But Dan Stevens, like I said, I thought that was pretty cool, where he's essentially a monster, a kaiju veterinarian, essentially, is what he is, where his introduction is he's installing a new tooth in Kong. And then he just so happens to have built this giant, like, mech glove that will, like, amp up Kong to the next level. I'm like,
they don't explain it
at all. Like, at all. It's like, you just had this thing sitting here just waiting, ready to go at a moment's notice in case.
Does Monarch have a factory of just a bunch of weapons they can, in case they need it for any like Godzilla or Kong? Do they have like helmets for them, or like do they have sneakers? Like what else do they got?
Shit, fucking give him clothes. Make him the new what's the logo of the monkey that always wears that always wears the chain and the baseball hat? The one that I'm thinking of. What am I thinking of?
Like the crypto?
I think so. I might be thinking of something else. I think so. I might be thinking of something else, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. I'm like, shit, why don't you just fully domesticate Kong, you know?
They're already on their way.
They're practically there. They're practically there already. So I'm just like, yeah, man. So, and then, right. So first of all, I think the fact that, let's be honest, this is a 20-minute long movie that they stretch out into 2 hours. It's a 20-minute long movie that they stretch out into 2 hours. And again, I know exactly what I'm getting, but at the same time, it's like, you didn't need to do it this silly. Like the scene at the end when like Scar King and Shimo, first of all, the fact that Scar King and Shimo, like they need like a scout to tell them that like, oh, we found a way back up to the surface. It's like Kong found his way to you. Therefore, that shows that your prison has been broken open. Can't you just like get out on your own? Like, why do you need one of the scouts to come back and tell you? You know, you would assume that since they tried to invade the surface world before, they know about how to circumnavigate Hollow Earth. So that like kind of confused me. Also, like the relationship between Kong and Zuko when that's built up, like that is pretty touching. But like, so you have this scene where like the opening scene is Kong accidentally like Kong is setting traps for like these other like predators that are in Hollow Earth in order to like catch his dinner. And one of the traps accidentally like opens like down into a rift into Scar King's lair. And so you have Zuko, which is like this baby ape that manages to escape. And then is basically like trying to draw Kong into several traps, presumably because it's working for Scar King and all that, but it doesn't work. And then it keeps trying to like get Kong killed over and over and over and over again. And Kong keeps giving it chances. Well, at least after the first time. And I'm just like, why? I'm like, I have so many questions there. Like it draws him into a lake where Kong has to like fight a literal sea serpent. And I'm just like, what are we doing here? And that's before he even shows him to Scar King, which it's like, I don't even remember what the prompt for him like showing him to Scar King was. Like, do you remember what that was?
For Zuko, like
for Zuko, like guiding Kong to Scar King, yeah.
It was just simply, I think it was just simply like Scar King had his slaves and he enlisted Zuko to go out and find him. I think that was really it.
Okay.
But also, I want to know what were those apes doing in that little area? They were just like carrying
Right,
rocks.
right, and like,
What were they doing?
if I had to guess, they were probably trying to dig their way out. If I had to guess,
Like downward, like
maybe downward, maybe they were like just trying to find another way out, like probably mining. I don't know, but like again, it's just so many questions where I'm like, if Kong managed to find his way in, how did they not know to follow him out? You know,
and
and
Scar King seems pretty intuitive too. He seems like smart
exactly.
enough that he should probably know something like that.
Exactly. Also, the fact of it's like, so they have this whole thing where it's like, oh, so they basically found their way to the center of the earth where like the Iwi that are living down there are essentially living in this giant crystalline structure that is essentially like, is the epicenter for the anti-gravity of Hollow Earth, essentially, because Hollow Earth is really interesting in terms of how its gravity works because of where it is situated in the center of the earth. And essentially what you have is there's this piece of crystal that Scar King uses to control Shimo. And I'm like, okay, a couple questions. Why is he not able to use that to manipulate other Titans? Why just Shimo? You know, like, wouldn't Scar King theoretically be able to have like an army of Titans at his control? I know Godzilla like defeated a decent amount of them, but like they show at the beginning of this movie that like, yeah, there are still other Titans that are getting up into Hollow Earth that Godzilla is fighting. You know, they even show him fighting Tiamat, which I thought, I'm like, oh shit, they have Tiamat. That's pretty cool. Ironic that he has the same name as the Celestial that is still halfway sticking out of the earth in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that they are only now 3 years later finally starting to investigate in the fourth Captain America movie. But I do think that it is that I did think that was a little bit curious there. And then, I mean, so here's the big elephant in the room, if you will. So we've talked about kind of some of the ridiculousness of this movie inherently, you know, and the fact that you literally have freaking. Well, actually, you know what? Hold on. First, I have one more thing. So they bring back Mothra, right? We forgot to mention that as well, and that's another bit where it's like, oh, I'm surprised somebody didn't like try to slander them. It's like false advertising, where it's like, you know, you have that shot of like Kong and Godzilla roaring outside of the pyramids in Egypt, and it's like, oh, so Mothra was in that shot. They just CG scrubbed her out, you know? Where you have it where. So Kong and Zuko escape from Scar King after Kong's arm is frozen by Scar King and he leaves his axe behind. And they managed to make their way back to the humans and the Iwi like behind, because the Iwi have like constructed their own like protective shield that is essentially made of Mothra's material. And essentially they need the main girl, I still can't even remember her name, to essentially bring back Mothra, which again, the logic of in terms of how that works still doesn't really make sense because Mothra was eviscerated by Ghidorah a couple of years ago. And then and then they give Kong the mech gauntlet and they're like, oh, well, you know, Kong's going to need some help. I'm like, okay, so now he's going to go to the surface world and try and get in touch with Godzilla. So naturally he jumps through a Hollow Earth portal, makes it back to the surface world and lands outside of Egypt. Godzilla is in Gibraltar. And for those of you who don't understand geography, Egypt, right, is all the way over here on the coast of Africa. Gibraltar is the strait between Portugal and Africa all the way across the Mediterranean. Now, I know these Titans are big, but not that damn big. And there's no fucking way that Godzilla saw Kong all the way across the Mediterranean, climbing out by the pyramids of Giza. So but that was all. That's just the tip of this iceberg. Like I said, Godzilla literally swan dives off the lake, somehow swims across the Mediterranean. This is how I know they didn't have a geography consultant, because I'm like, time-wise, that does not add up at all. Comes out, starts fighting with Kong. Kong like is starting to get like the smackdown. So I'm like, okay, this is like a little bit of a rematch from the last one, whatever. He's beating up Godzilla. Godzilla's like nerfed to the gills now with well, like I said, because he's got the purple spikes and the purple atomic breath and everything. Godzilla's about to finish off Kong again before Mothra and the girl show up. And literally there's a scene where Godzilla puts his head right down next to the girl. And like, I swear to God, the girl's like about to pet him and everything. I'm like, no, you can't do that to Godzilla. You can do that with Kong. Sure, you can turn Kong into a pet. Fine, whatever, but not Godzilla. He's the one you can't.
Yeah, Godzilla's the force of nature. You can't touch him.
Exactly. Next thing you know, it's like they're roaring together. The humans down in Hollow Earth are like, oh no, Godzilla and Kong, they're gonna, you know, they're gonna, Scar King and Shima, they're gonna invade. And they're like, oh well, they're gonna keep the fight down here in Hollow Earth so they don't destroy any human structures. And what happens? So they land. You have the shot in the trailer of them running together. Kong literally jumps onto Godzilla's back as they're running at it. You have the slow-mo shot of them all jumping at each other. And then the Iwi like turn off the gravity of Hollow Earth. Essentially, oh my God, I can't believe I'm actually saying this. This is so dumb. This is literally, we've gotten to the point where it's like, okay, we've gotten past like the original Toho Godzilla, which was like semi-serious, which was pretty serious. Now we're in like the goofy phase of like the 60s through 70s of Godzilla, where it's just like straight goofy. You know the one where it's like Godzilla on his tail levitating up and like levitating forward to kick the one thing. You know, we're in that phase of Godzilla, of American Godzilla movies now, where these movies have literally become Fast and Furious, Marvel, the most recent wave of Jurassic Park movies. It's those kinds of movies that we have become. And it's silly. It's very, very silly. And of course, because these movies can't help themselves, they still somehow end up in the surface world, because through the gravity, they end up falling through a portal and ending up in Rio, and they fight in Rio. Because I'm like, okay, so that this just proves they are what's it called? They are contractually obligated to destroy a city in every single one of these movies. And this time it's Rio. So they end up fighting, and yeah, that's the final fight. But I guess the issue in terms of why I feel like so many of my problems with this movie seem so much more apparent than with the last couple is we are in a post-Monarch and Godzilla -1 world, where we had two different properties, both on the American side and the Japanese side, that were so objectively good, I would argue, because I really, really enjoyed both those. -1 was in my top.
Yeah, I agree.
-1 was in my top 10 movies, and Monarch was in my top 10 shows of last year. That when you kind of get back to just like the silly monsters, like fighting like video game characters, expositioning away, it kind of it doesn't have the same effect. I feel like, there's only so much turning off our brain we can do when the rest of what we have to compare it to is like actually objectively good. Because I mean, -1 was a surprise to say the least in terms of like how fucking awesome it was. But I would even argue that Monarch as well, in terms of adding a lot more context and subtext, and also being the only one of these American properties that's actually cracked how to do interesting human characters with compelling subplots and drama of their own. I mean, did you watch Monarch?
Yeah, I loved Monarch. I would say it's just really bad timing with -1 to have it like just mere months away from this movie.
Yeah.
Monarch, though, is part of the same universe. So when you do compare it to this movie, it is like looking at like two completely different things.
Right.
And there are things that are brought up in the Monarch show that are very interesting concepts that they totally ignore in this movie,
Yes.
like the concept of time
Yes.
in the Hollow Earth versus up on the surface.
Exactly. And then completely. Now, if I give them one benefit of the doubt, it is that they go out of their way to make sure that they're like, okay, Monarch is set after the first Godzilla and also prior to the first Godzilla in terms of like building up to it. So they make sure to differentiate that there is a significant amount of time in between the events of Monarch and later on, because they established that when Monarch begins, because there's the dual different timelines in Monarch. The one timeline is set immediately in the aftermath of the first Godzilla movie from 2014, which they said takes place in 2014, 2015, versus these movies take place like, I think they're like set like later on, because they even said that like Godzilla King of the Monsters does not take place in 2019. It takes place like later on in like 2021. And I think that this movie we're supposed to be in like 2025, 2026, something like that. So like they do go out of their way to make sure that there is a significant amount of time that is passed. So they probably managed to figure out a way to like circumnavigate the time fluctuations between Hollow Earth and the surface world. But still, you're right. It's Monarch. What was so cool about that show is that show basically like takes like a fringe/Lost approach to the Godzilla verse, where they're essentially having the not only interesting human characters, but also like exploring like these different sci-fi tropes that like kind of explain around the setting of the monsters, in addition to just having like the crazy monster action. Not to mention the fact that unlike these movies where these giant things have basically been reduced to pets, and Monarch, these things are like genuinely scary. Like, I don't remember, but the end of that first episode, when those bug things dragged the one girl into the pit, that was horrifying. I was like actually on the edge of my seat watching that.
It gave me remnants of like the part in Kong, the Peter Jackson Kong, fighting the bugs.
Yeah, exactly. Could not agree more. Man, the Peter Jackson Kong, man, that's another thing too. That's another movie that is kind of aged really well as a result of like kind of the silliness of these most recent movies. Because even though that movie's 3 hours long, man, that movie, Peter Jackson did his homework there, and the visual effects in that movie still hold up. And I hate the fact that there are kids that were born when that movie came out that are now freshmen in college. That's absolutely disgusting. Jeez. But we are old.
For that one.
We are old, man. But yeah, so I guess it's kind of a summation of all of those things, which is where you have the fact that they can't that this movie has gotten a little bit too silly for its own good. The fact that they are probably taking some of the wrong cues and lessons from some of the other franchises that I will admit have not been doing so well, because Marvel's not been doing so hot. Fast and Furious, this most recent one, was the lowest grossing one in years. None of the tricks and tropes were, and the fact that we now have other properties as well, both within this franchise and outside of this franchise as well, that are arguably doing it better. Because, like, -1, forget the fact that Godzilla's in that movie. You could almost take Godzilla out of that movie. That would just be a compelling enough Japanese-made World War II drama on its own before you even throw in Godzilla. And the fact that with the way that Godzilla is utilized in that movie, it almost plays out more like a horror movie than like a giant monster kaiju movie, especially in that opening scene. And I mean, the director even admitted, like, he very, very much was influenced by Spielberg when he directed that. And Monarch, yeah. And Monarch, like I said, Monarch being more of like a conspiracy theory show along the lines of like X-Files and Fringe and stuff, I think adds like kind of a new layer. So when you have these other properties around it that are doing so much more, then you get back to this and it's like, oh, it's just more silly monsters fighting and humans going around giving exposition. And I mean, I think it's so funny that you mentioned the guy, I can't remember the actor's name, but you said he was the cop in the Batman, and then he was also in Andor as well.
He was an Andor.
And he's literally just there to be like, oh, standard tough guy who I'm like, oh, he's going to get eaten. And then not only does he get eaten, he gets eaten in the dumbest way possible. And they just get a quick blink miss it, and then they pass it by. And they never mention him again.
I love when you have like characters in these movies that are like such dicks, like such assholes, because you set up a good relationship with the audience that this guy's gonna, or this girl is gonna get killed in a horrendous way, and they do nothing with that. It was such an anticlimactic way to kill him. I'm like, you could have done literally anything else,
right?
But they Deep Blue Sea'd him
exactly
like a tree.
And the worst part is they didn't even make him that much of a dick. I thought that, like, oh, we're going to root for this guy when he gets eaten. I kind of just felt bad because, like, no, he's just like a guy who is like, essentially trying to make sure that they are surviving. And he literally just met Dan Stevens' character. So why would he have any reason to trust him? And like you said, they literally just have a tree there that just comes in and eats him. And I'm like, and it's not gonna, and like the other guys are standing right there. It's not gonna try and eat any one of them. Like, this is supposed to be Hollow Earth. This is supposed to be scary. There's supposed to be things that can come out at any minute that can eat them. And then you just have Brian Tyree Henry making a dumb joke.
Yeah, and it was the only time when they were being chased by anything. I feel like, if I remember correctly, nothing else ever like.
They're never chased by anything, and the rest of it, it's like, this is Hollow Earth. This is literally the epicenter where these monsters come from, and the humans have like no threats. Now, again, I'm not trying to make excuses, but again, you would assume that they would have mapped out Hollow Earth. You would assume they would have like a pretty good understanding of how it works in the years that they've been exploring it. But at the same time, you also do have like the people that are like supposed to be monitoring Hollow Earth, and they get killed pretty quickly. But like, they're kind of just sitting there, just like schlumming around. The one guy's getting golf ball. I'm like, yeah, those guys kind of deserve to get what they got. They kind of deserve to get killed. This is not like one of those things where it's like, oh, also you're monitoring like a whole other world within our world that's filled to the brim with giant monsters and exotic things. How does that get boring? This isn't like a Jurassic World situation where it's like you've had so many years with dinosaurs now that you kind of get bored with it. And it's not like these are kids that are on their smartphones. These are, you would assume, trained professionals, and they're bored. Like, what is going on here? So, yeah. It's just, with all that being said, it really sucks. I thought this was going to be a longer conversation, but like, I feel like that pretty much sums up everything that I wanted to say about this movie in terms of like, just exactly what it is, like, especially, and what makes this even more disappointing is the fact that this was supposed to be Mickey 17 weekend. We were supposed to get new Bong Joon-ho this weekend, and Warner Brothers decided to push it, not only push it, but give it a January release date.
It's not staying in January.
It better not.
Staying there.
It better not. It better fucking not, because that's an Oscar movie right there, is what that is.
Robert Pattinson's going to be getting that MRI for another 2 years. We're never going to find out what happens.
Oh my God. Oh my God. It's gonna annoy me, to say the least. But real quick, so John, do me a favor. Give me your final thoughts on Star Rays, then we'll just chat a little bit more. I gotta go pee real quick.
Yeah. So I think that I think these movies are more catered towards kids. I think what's happening now with this franchise is that we're leaning further into like, what do kids want to see, not what like just general audiences want to see. It's not like a 4-quadrant movie where we're trying to please everybody. Having said that, I have heard the box office results are pretty strong for this, so that probably means we're going to get more of these kinds of movies, and they're probably going to delve deeper into the silliness. I think I enjoy it for what it is. It's not what I really want from these kinds of movies. I like more of what we were talking about earlier, like the 2014 Godzilla, or like the Godzilla -1, or even like Peter Jackson's King Kong, where there's reverence and earnestness, and we're actually trying to take it seriously, but we're also building like adventure and scale. Uh, Having said that, I did enjoy this movie, and there are a lot of moments that I will rewatch because of how stupid they are. There's several parts of this movie where I was laughing out loud, and it prompted me to like I would go back on like HBO or whatever and rewatch like when King Kong is just like throwing Suko around like a toy. I have not laughed harder at a movie probably this year so far, but there's several moments in this movie where I'm like, this is really funny. I would actually like if they leaned more into like the stupid stuff like that. But having said that, I think it's the weakest of this whole franchise so far. It's not bad. It's just I'm not a fan exactly of where we're going here. But I think kids are really gonna like this. I saw this in a movie packed with families, and they were all having a grand old time. So I feel like it's not for me at least anymore. I feel like
Yeah.
no, these specific kinds of Godzilla King Kong movies are for them, not for
Yeah,
like
it's unfortunate because it's unfortunate because it literally you're right. It's in yet another franchise that has become no longer for us, that is for kids, because like God, it's so weird to think of like Godzilla and giant monster movies as being like kiddie movies essentially, but that's kind of what they have become essentially, where you're right. Like the fact that this is that like one of the fun, we don't get comedies in theaters anymore, but one of the funniest movies that we have so far this year is a giant monster kaiju movie where we've literally gotten to the point where one giant ape smacking a smaller ape around is one of the funniest things we can see in a year. Like, I don't know how I feel about that. I'm not gonna lie.
we have a movie called Ricky Stenicki, the John Cena movie, that like 15 years ago would probably be a top 10 grosser of the summer, and now it's just on Amazon.
Amazon,
You know,
yeah.
and
Roadhouse.
Zac Efron stars in that too.
Roadhouse with Jake Gyllenhaal, a movie star, which they fought, directed by Doug Liman, which they fought to get in theaters on Amazon.
I think that would have done pretty well in theaters.
Yeah,
honestly.
it absolutely would have. It absolutely would have. So like, I don't understand these studios' priorities when it comes to certain of these movies. They really like. I'm sorry, whoever is doing like quality control in terms of like dictating which movies go to theaters versus which movies go to streaming. I'm sorry, whoever is doing that needs to get fired and replaced, because Jesus Christ, like we need to get some more diversity of movies in theaters. Like, I'm sorry, but the fact that like, and I even said this, but like all of the theatrical movies that we're getting this year just feel the same. You know, they're all like, especially this year, it's like they pick a theme every year as far as like what movies they want to put out in theaters. You know, and this year it's all dystopic or disaster movies. You know, because after this we got Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, Civil War, Twisters, Furiosa, and what's the other one that I'm forgetting about?
Quiet One comes out
Quiet
in
Place
June
Day
too.
One. There we go. Thank you. Yes, Quiet Place Day One. All disaster or dystopia movies, and I'm like, come on, Hollywood, like get your shit together. You know?
Yeah. I was saying when you were going to the bathroom too,
Yeah.
though, I think this movie's actually doing pretty well at the box office. It seems.
I'm pretty sure it's doing decently well.
It had a good Friday hold, so I
Yeah.
think they're probably going to make more of these kinds of movies. At
Unfortunately,
least for Godzilla and Kong. Anyway.
unfortunately, because these are the types of movies that get butts in seats. But you know what? Dune is still going to wipe out every other movie that came out this year, so that at least gives me some hope as well there. But that kind of continues in like the whole what I'm going to call, like I said, the auteurist spectacle, if you will, because if you follow, because Dune is kind of the next in like kind of a line of movies that have been coming out over the last couple of years that have been like, you know, the go-to movies. You know, your Top Guns, your Avatars, your Oppenheimers, your Barbies, now Dune 2. You know, kind of what and as well the Batman as well. I would throw in there as well, which are like these auteurist spectacle movies. You know, these grand, massive big feeling movies, usually that are going to be over 2.5 hours long, because every single one of those movies range between 2.5 and 3 hours long. And what's it called? And they're all directed by auteur-driven director. So I think that's kind of the new like classification of movies, right? We get like one auteurist spectacle movie per year, and then the rest are kind of just going to be like a mix between like, you know, just kind of whatever cheaper spectacle, you know, and then everything else is going to go to streaming. That kind of seems to be the new normal, unfortunately, that we have. My final thoughts and star ratings on Godzilla and Kong, the New Empire. I went in expecting one thing. I got that. I can't say that I'm happy with what I got. I can't say I wasn't entertained, but at the same time, I can't necessarily say that this was like a good movie per se. I only ended up giving this, I think, like I originally had this at 3.5 stars, but I think I'm gonna lower it. I think it's only a 2.5 out of 5 for me.
I'm giving it a 3 only because I had a good time in the theater, and I think in its own way, it's enjoyable enough that like I can justify it not being a bad movie, but it's not a good movie either. So just
Yeah.
throwing it in at a 3 feels fair for me for
Yeah,
this one.
that is fair. Yeah. So before we get out of here, John, I just did want to give a quick. Unfortunately, we got some very distressing news yesterday, which is that Chance Perdomo of Chilling
Yeah.
Adventures of Sabrina and Gen V unfortunately tragically passed away in a motorcycle accident yesterday at age 27. What's called? Just wanted to give a quick notification of that. It was very sad, very tragic. Unfortunately, the same way that James Dean died. Very unfortunately, kid seemed like he had a really bright future ahead of him. His character Andre was one of the most compelling, probably one of my favorite characters on Gen V, the boys spinoff. And as was announced yesterday as well, they are delaying as they were just about to enter production for season 2 of Gen V, and they are delaying that. They're going to have to rewrite the entire season. My question for you is, do you think that this impacts the boys season 4? Because do you think that we're getting any of the characters from Gen V in the boys season 4? Because as they announced, those two series are very closely tied together.
So yeah, echoing your thoughts on it, just really tragic and sad. Dude was 27 years old. Like
Yep.
you hate to see like guy had so much ahead of him, and he was such a talented dude from
Yep.
what we saw in Gen V. In my opinion, just like in my head, I thought we were maybe only going to get like the main character from Gen V maybe in the boys season 4. I don't know if they were going to bring all those characters into the show.
Well, I guess just my question being that the way that we left them off with Gen V, they were all kind of imprisoned in that one unknown underground facility. So I assumed that, if anything, we were probably going to see like the boys and maybe Butcher and then breaking them out once they find out about them. That was
maybe.
kind of my thought process there.
But I'm sure I feel like it's probably something that they probably could write around because I don't think it was probably that for. I know that they're trying to integrate Gen V and the boys together, but I don't think it was like I don't know if it's going to be so deeply ingrained like that. But I guess we'll find out in June like how deep it goes. I'm guessing it's going to be a couple scenes like early on in the season.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's pretty much it for me.
Yeah.
I guess.
Well, I guess just my thought process there being that my thought process there being that like it's too late to do anything with the boys season 4. Like that's locked in the tank, ready to go. We're just waiting for
a while.
Exactly. Yeah. So like in terms of like anything, yeah. So I figured it was going to affect Gen V more than the boys, but still, it was really a rough one, and that one kind of hit me. It kind of reminded me that kind of brought it back to when Anton Yelchin passed, which
I was literally just thinking that,
and the fact that it's been 8 years since that happened, which is fucking nuts. Like I still remember that. I still remember when that happened, like it was yesterday. So, yeah. Unfortunately, another sad one. But with that, like I said, it is officially March 31st. It is Easter, and March Madness is over, people. So, like I said, we got one more month of spring, and then we're into summer. And can we just talk about how stacked April is this year? Like, it's funny because I notoriously usually make fun of April as like kind of being like usually a dog shit month for movies, but this year it's almost like March and April swap, where it's like March kind of got all of like the whatever content, like all the good stuff that came out in March was on streaming, and all the theatrical releases, with the exception of Dune 2, were kind of whatever. But April, dude, we got Monkey Man, we got Civil War, we got Fallout on Amazon, we got Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, we got Abigail, we got Rebel Moon Part 2, we got Ripley on Netflix next weekend. We're wrapping it up with Challengers finally, dude. April's kind of, we got kind of a banger April ahead of us here.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. I feel like it is. It's basically what you just said, where last year March was like every single week stacked.
Yes.
And this like April's got a lot, and I feel like April's got a lot of movies that like aren't like IP driven, but like they're very promising concepts.
Yes.
That actually look like they're going to execute for the most part based on the trailers we've been given, like your Abigails and your Challengers, like stuff like that.
Yeah. Exactly. Couldn't remember. Also, low-key, the year of the return of Dan Stevens between Abigail, and Cuckoo, the Neon movie that's coming out.
And Dan Stevens is really popping off.
Yeah, absolutely. Which also, can we talk about some of these Neon movies that are coming out? We talked about Immaculate a little bit at the top of the podcast. Freaking, oh man, between Cuckoo and then Long Legs, Oz Perkins, and Nicolas Cage, like, sign me the fuck up.
That movie the trailers are so good. I'm going to be so sad if it doesn't live up to like the creepiness and tone of those trailers.
But I can't imagine it wouldn't, because I mean, this is the same guy that did Gretel and Hansel, correct?
Yes.
And I mean, just the vibes of that movie alone were like insane, So I thought that was that's one that I'm very, very much looking forward to. And then
And
our
Monica Monroe she always picks good movies too. So I feel like I
yes.
can't doubt her. She's
Yes,
always
she
in great
does.
horror movies.
Yes, yes, indeed, she does. I could not agree with that more. Yeah, so I'm just trying to think, and so I just wanted to give April a little bit of a shout out before we get into our inevitably not predictable, but like we kind of all know like the types of movies that are kind of come out in the summer. So April could be like relatively interesting this year as well.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And we were originally supposed to get challengers back in like September, so it's
Yeah.
cool that it lines up now to
Yes,
be part of the
exactly.
stacked lineup.
Especially because if Queer ends up coming out this year as well, we could get double Guadagnino this year, which I will not be complaining because I've been very, very, because every single one of Lucas movies that's come out over the last couple of years, I've really, really enjoyed.
Yeah, that dude doesn't miss. I feel like
No.
he's not for everybody, but the movies he makes are always work.
Yeah.
Like they always work in whatever way they're
Exactly.
supposed to be.
Suspiria and Bones and All both made my top 10 lists of respectively of the years that they came out. And the only reason why Call Me By Your Name didn't back in 2017 is because I hate Armie Hammer in that movie. And because 2017 in hindsight is really low-key a stacked year. It's funny. I remember not liking 2017 as a movie year while the year was going on. But looking back, that year is low-key kind of actually a stacked year. I'm going to be really, it's funny because I'm actually, it's funny that we mentioned that like the American Godzilla is turning 10 years old. I'm working actually on my top 10 movies that are turning 10 this year. And
Oh, wow.
you know what year that is, right?
It's 2014.
Yeah, which is
that was a big year, I remember.
all-time movie. Oh my God. Like that year to me is one of the all-time goated movie years. That's up there to me with like 75, with 82, with 99, 39. 2014 is up there with those years in terms of being a goated all-time stacked movie year. My top 10 list might be one of the greatest top 10 lists I've ever put together. Let me just put it that way. So that video will be coming out depending on how my editing process goes today. That video will probably be out sometime this week. So definitely keep an eye out for that one. Guys. John, it's great having you on again. Thanks so much for joining me. Where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
As always, I appreciate being on this podcast. I always have a great time. You can pretty much find me everywhere at Mothman Jones, no spaces, but primarily on Twitter, Instagram, and on Letterboxd, where I'm always active, always watching movies and always keeping it filthy.
Yes, indeed. Again, the movies are strong. The Letterboxd force is strong with us, indeed.
Oh,
and
yeah.
of course, you can always follow me with everything going on at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms at Official Talking TV Podcast. Make sure you subscribe to us if you're watching us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitch. This episode will be available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts tomorrow in audio format. And as always, people, 12 seasons in a short film and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next week.